So the Biden administration has issued a first of its kind executive order on artificial intelligence. We're going to be talking about that today here on the Left Wing. I'm Desmond Price with the Independent Thought Podcast, joined by my co-host John Cooper and our guests CJ and Natalie. Let's kind of dive right into this. I'm not going to lie to y'all. This is a topic that has kind of been a little a passion topic of mine. Well, I'll get to that here in a second here. So the Biden administration has created a new executive order that they outlined in a little bit of details in a speech yesterday. Some of the basic ideas of what's going to be in this executive order is creating a new safety and security standards for artificial intelligence that they all say will protect consumer privacy, advocating for civil rights. This will come with different disputes like landlords when people applying for there so that there isn't some further discrimination when AI is involved, protecting consumers overall, supporting workers that might come up with labor disputes, promoting innovation and competition, working with internal partners, as they said, and developing guidance for federal agencies and procurements. Now, more specifically, this order addresses training data for large AI systems, and it lays out the need to evaluate how agencies collect and use commercially available data, including data purchased from data brokers, especially when that data involves personal identifiers. Now, this is all coming at the afterwards of ChatGPT's rollout last November, to where after the first 2 months of it being out, it became the fastest growing consumer application in history. And after it was just added to Microsoft's Bing, within a couple of days, it was criticized for toxic speech and using popular AI generators that came under fire for having racial bias and propagating stereotypes. So the question, I have so many thoughts when it comes to artificial intelligence. I have legitimately been kept up at night thinking about this since I was a child. I'm not going to lie to you. But before I get into all of the nightmares that I have about artificial intelligence and how I'm actually excited about what I'm seeing here today from the Biden administration, I first want to get everyone else's opinions on all of this. John, when you first came across this story, what was your reaction to this executive order by the Biden administration?
My reaction was a little, like, honestly, I think it's a good step. I think it's a good step forward that doesn't do too much, but I think what it does do is important. To me, the biggest importance was the protections when it comes to national security. And I think that is one of the most important roles for the government to start figuring out right now. And it's kind of interesting that it's coming from an octogenarian president who you would think his administration, this wouldn't be at the top of the list. But like, these technologies are going to, I mean, they kind of already are getting there, but like, these scary things are going to start happening. Like the articles I was reading, a lot of the protections were about AI being trained on human DNA, on chemical compounds, because it's going to be very soon that those sort of AIs can be used to create weapons, like mass weapons, chemical weapons, even nukes. And that, to me, like, that felt like the precipice for this. Less so than the labor protections, because those were all kind of very wishy-washy when I was reading it. And I'm not an expert in this in terms of from a legal standpoint. But I'm at least glad that it's starting the process of addressing the massive changes that are going to be coming to our society way sooner than most people. Like, everyone knows of AI, but it's going to change the way that we operate in the same way the smartphone did. And when that starts to happen, it's going to probably move faster than the government's being able to address it. So, like, my primary thought was, I'm glad we're starting the process now and not just trying to play catch up when shit hits the fan. Natalie, what are your thoughts on everything AI related?
So this is also a passionate topic for me as a journalist and a person in media, so much so that on my radio show on KDKA every week, I have a segment completely dedicated to this called Media and Manipulation, because on top of all of the scaries that you already talked about, what I'm really worried about is now that we live in a post-truth society where you can really live in your little bubble and never really have to look at any other viewpoint or acknowledge it. Now there's a ton of deep fakes that are happening. And I think we are not ahead of this. We are way behind. It's going to get harder and harder for journalists to even decipher what is a real image and what isn't. It's going to get harder for audiences to do that. So this idea around education, I think, needs to go hand in hand with these types of executive orders and bills. I'm really excited that the Biden administration is, if nothing else, forcing a conversation around this on a national level, because this is going to impact national security. It's going to impact every single part of our lives, every single facet. And I always say, if we're talking about AI, we need to also be talking about universal basic income, because these things are going to have to start happening in tandem. And we need to wake up and recognize that if we don't acknowledge this is going to be a revolution, the next 10 years, 10, 15 years from now is going to look nothing like this as it pertains to every single industry and sector. We need to get in front of it. And so I appreciate what the Biden administration is doing. And of course, executive orders have their limits. But I think my concern is we have an aging population that is not interested or understanding of AI. I think when we recognize where the landscape is going to be in the next 10 to 15 years, we need to understand that we have an aging population that is not engaged with AI and doesn't understand it, doesn't really want a part of it. And they're the people representing us for the most part in our House of Representatives and in our Senate at a lot of times, both the national and the local level. So, you know, millennials, Gen Zs, and the alphas coming up, we've got to get really politically activated here and start putting people in positions of power that can represent us and protect us from ourselves in a lot of ways. And also understanding that AI is only as good as we are. So if we continue to uphold systems of oppression like white supremacy, patriarchy, all of the things, you know, that are holding us back, capitalism, I think we're never going to be able to advance AI beyond to a space where it could actually do real good for our society.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I agree. I think it's a good first step, but I think this executive order also is missing a lot of things. And I think it's also difficult for that to be successful without things like Congress passing data privacy legislation.
Yes.
Like a lot of, I think the executive order itself doesn't really have a strong like enforcement or implementation mechanism. I think it calls for a lot of action that I'm not confident that US agencies can actually carry out. I feel like it's like trying to regulate the internet. Like it's so difficult because it's so decentralized. And a lot of it is like, it functions as more as like suggestions rather than mandates. So I think a lot of companies, it's very easy for them to work around the things that are being passed in this executive order or try to fake it. I mean, I was reading, they're like, we're going to put watermarks on deep fakes. And I'm like, good luck, babe. Like they put watermarks on every deep fake. Like, I don't know if that's, I don't know. Like, it's a beautiful idea, but I'm like, I just don't have a lot of confidence that this is something that they could actually pull off, at least like in its totality.
It also just goes hand in hand with what we were talking about earlier with the labor disputes, because the reality is, my friend, she's an actor, and they're talking about how AI, one of the things they're striking about is that AI can be used, they can do a full body scan of you as an actor, and then they're saying, we want to use your likeness in perpetuity. So not only are we dealing with the implications of this on a national security level, but on a labor rights level as well. And so it's such a major and complex topic that unfortunately over the last 40 years, we've seen the Republican Party just take all the teeth out of government regulation. And so now we're at a point where we can't regulate a damn thing. And now we're all going to sit there and go, what's happening? Why can't we fix this? Because you allowed corporations to run your lives. And the only people we have any say on is the government, and they have no power now. So that's kind of where we're at, but we can still turn it around.
You know, there's so many different aspects of the story that I found kind of like hopeful a little bit, but also it's just on top of so many troubling things that have existed for a while now. Artificial intelligence is already beyond what we know how to grasp, and it's in its infancy. And as you were saying before, Natalie, talking about like universal basic income, that's one of the things that I think about, because artificial intelligence will probably eliminate more jobs than it's going to create. And so what is that going to do to the population at large once that fully takes in? But also, CJ, you brought up, data privacy. That's also a big deal. We don't have really any data privacy in America right now. One of the reasons that Biden brought up this executive order, which they addressed in the piece I saw on CNBC, was that over in the European Union, they're already finalizing protections for people over throughout those countries. And then here in America, we hadn't even started yet. So this was more or less like, oh, we can't be so flat-footed that we have nothing, like in the pipes right now to be dealing with this. So I'm glad something's happening, but also I'm just like giving points to everybody right now, as John was saying, like, let's see what actually happens here versus just people talking about an executive order. Like, when will actual, like, true legislation be put into place to give everyone the protection they need from artificial intelligence? Because as a millennial, someone who grew up in the 90s and the early 2000s, I'm a little scarred by the Terminator and the Matrix, everyone. I'm a little scarred. I'm not going to lie. Kind of thinking about that my whole life. And, the interesting thing about those movies, they don't really seem super far-fetched anymore. They just really don't. They really don't. But maybe that's just me. The thing that I really want to see the most from all of this is that everyone kind of take a minute to slow down and truly put in protections for people, because like everything else in our country, people are so enamored with the convenience and all of the glitz and glamour that can come with how AI can make our lives better. No one is taking the time to think about how many different ways it could be restrictive, how it could be destructive, how it could just be more invasive than even we're used to having right now in an age where we're having less and less privacy. So keeping that conversation at the forefront is very important to me as we continue down this spiral of, hey, let's just see what AI can do for us.
Something that I want to bring to the forefront of this conversation is that this is a rare instance where I find that looking at progressives as a whole, we are actually not very progressive on this topic. I feel like if you just scroll Twitter and see the regular progressive voices, there's a lot of anti-AI sentiment. Even if you just listen to everything that we just said, there's a lot of negativity when it comes to the topic of AI. And I kind of wanted to clear that up, because I think people get overly negative about it. I think AI is going to change the world and make our lives infinitely better. Like what I said earlier about, the potential to make chemical weapons and sequencing human DNA, like it also has the potential to cure everything ever, with the same sort of technology. It has the potential to just make life so simple, because like you said, Desmond, it's in its infancy right now. All the things that you're like, oh my God, that's so cool, ChatGPT can talk to me. You sound like the people who ran out of the movie theater because they saw a moving train, like back in the 19 whatever. So whenever, but it's true. It's so young right now. We have no idea what it's going to do. And those are good things. And we should be excited about it. The reason that a lot of people on the left, a lot of progressives, a lot of leftists are scared of it and are like, tap the brakes, is because the things that we're talking about here, data privacy rights, the right to your own image and likeness, they aren't in place. We don't have these protections in place, like labor protections for lost jobs, like we were talking about earlier with the UAW strike, and how they enforced that they would have protections for their jobs when the switch to EV changed. This technology is going to be advancing so rapidly that people are going to have to completely change their careers within the same industry 10 times in their lifetime. And that's not going to be able to happen with the way we currently look at labor. It's going to need protections. And without it, it's going to hurt a lot of people. And that's the reason I think a lot of us on the left can sometimes come across as being regressive on the subject of AI, because we know that we aren't prepared for it. But maybe I'm speaking for people here. CJ, do you, what do you think about that?
You make an interesting point, bringing up all of the positives that come along with AI. To me, it reminds me a lot of the early emergence of the internet, where people had these beautiful utopian ideals of what the internet was going to be. And we have seen that a lot of those are accurate, and the internet has done so much good for people. And there's also horrific things that happen over the internet. So with AI, I know someone who works at Google very high up in their AI department, who would come home and talk about how he's worried that AI is going to kill all of us. and he's working with this for-profit company that's trying to advance AI as quickly and recklessly as possible. Like, that's my biggest concern, is that it's not being developed by people who really care deeply about its implications on society. It's being developed by people who have a profit incentive, and they're being motivated by how much money that they can make off of it and how much money that they can make using it. That's the part of it that really freaks me out.
So I tell you that I have a fear of the Terminator, and you tell me that you know somebody who's afraid that AI is going to kill us all. This is, you see, this is not helping
He's
right
gonna have
now.
nightmares tonight. Well, I think honestly too, I don't think we have a regressive view on this. I think we have a realistic view on this. And I think Democrats, progressives, we actually get called out, I think, for being idealistic most of the time, which I think is one of the strengths and weaknesses of the left, right? Because we can picture that utopia. But no, I don't think that this is all doom and gloom, but we need to get in front of this. And once again, everything is connected, right? This is connected to labor rights. It's also, in my opinion, connected to campaign finance reform, which I'm not hearing people talk about in connection to AI. Because if we really want to get these protections in place, which we all know needs to happen, if we have any chance for this potential utopia, we know the minute that bills are put on the table to do such, we're going to have companies like Google and other spaces funneling money to politicians to squash those bills. So I think, once again, if we want to see any progression in these spaces, we have to address how we're shaping our government. And I think campaign finance reform also needs to be a big conversation piece to this puzzle.
You know, just speaking to some of the things that it might be able to do, when I first heard about the new robotics that are coming out that might be able to help people walk again, for instance, or help people deal with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, so on and so forth, it's not all doom and gloom. And I am very hopeful for what it might be able to do. You know, I think for me, when I'm looking at the political landscape and I'm watching people talk about things, whether they're very in the know or they're kind of in and out or they're apolitical, there is a comfort with essentially just focusing on the convenience of a technology and not thinking about anything else that goes with it. And I'm sure that everywhere you go, everyone will just be talking about the convenience of artificial intelligence and all the things it can do for us. That'll dominate the conversation. So I think it's almost, you know, pertinent for some of us to be able to have the counter argument of trying to be cautious of what it might do to us if the wrong people are in charge of it, or if they just don't create the barriers they need to create. So I think it's a little bit of both here. Like, yeah, it's not all doom and gloom, but we also need to be vigilant, because this is essentially creating a new level of power that we've never seen before. And that power in the wrong hands, or just being left unfettered, can be incredibly dangerous.
And to add to that, if we're going to talk about curing disease, who gets cured? Because we don't have universal healthcare in this country. So yeah, that's great if we get AI involved that can do all of these wonderful things, but it's not enough just to be able to do it. It's how do we access it? And I think accessibility is a huge component to this conversation as well. And once again, like, there's just another tether of how all things are connected, and so many things in the United States that other countries already have in place as a part of just like human rights don't exist over here. So I think we've got a lot of work to do in many spaces for this all to converge in a way that will do the most good for the most people.